Everyone. Today we're going to learn about Charles Darwin, a little bit about his life, and his contribution to our understanding of evolution. First question to think about is when you hear the word evolution, what do you think that means? In three short words, evolution simply means change over time. What exactly changes in evolution? Well, it's the percentage of the different alleles or genes in a group that go up or down. And we call that kind of group of genes a gene pool. And thus the appearance of traits within a population changes. True or false? Darwin had a beagle named Galapagos. Well, I hope you picked false. Darwin visited the Galapagos Islands on a boat called the HMS Beagle. If you ever get on Jeopardy, that's the kind of question they ask, and you owe me half your winnings. What kind of student was Darwin? This is what his father had to say about him. You care for nothing but shooting, dogs, and rat catching, and you will be a disgrace to yourself and your family. Yikes. If my dad said that about me, I'd feel pretty bad. There's Charles Darwin's birth date, and a little $sign simply means he was born into a family of wealth. That afforded him opportunities to get an education that other people in that era may not have gotten. At 16, he went into the University of Edinburgh's medical school, decided that wasn't his thing, and eventually graduated with a degree as a minister. He then later went on to get a bachelor's degree in science. Where'd he go on vacation? Well, he went lots of places. He took a trip around the world, and this trip took about 5 years. He was on board the ship as an unpaid naturalist, studying geology, mapping, collecting things. Now, was Charles Darwin ever in the Olympics? No, he was not. But the fact that he got seasick had a big impact on his life. He preferred to walk if they were going just a short distance in a day rather than riding on the ship. All that walking allowed him to make many observations and notice things and collect things he would not have otherwise found. Well, what did he collect on this vacation? Well, notebooks of observations, dead specimens of birds and other animals, bones, fossils, and all of these things helped him figure out his theory. Charles Darwin returned from his vacation a famous person. Oddly, that's true. The work he did on his trip, the samples and the notes he sent back, made him a fairly famous naturalist. Did Darwin play the vestibular organ? No. Vestibular organ is a part of an organism that no longer seems to have a purpose. At some point in evolutionary history, we think that they may have had a role, and we use them, and we'll talk about them later in this unit, about evidence of evolution. The human appendix and your wisdom teeth are probably the best examples in the human body. Darwin's father was the governor of the Galapagos Islands. No, that is not true. But the governor of the Galapagos Islands, along with a couple other people, all contributed something to Darwin's eventual theory of natural selection. The governor was able to look at a finch and determine which exact island it came from. And that made Darwin very aware of the small variations or differences within members of a species. Another person who had quite an influence on his thinking was a geologist named Sir Charles Lyell. He wrote a book explaining that maybe the Earth is very, very, very old, and it undergoes constant, slow, uniform changes. Think about how erosion in the Colorado River created the Grand Canyon. That's a kind of idea he had in mind. Another person who influenced Darwin's thinking was an economist named Thomas Malthus. And what he thought or wrote about was that humans produce more offspring than the earth can sustain. So human population is kept under control by natural factors like famine, disease, and war. If you remember back in the fall, we talked about limiting factors in an ecosystem, food, water, shelter. This was kind of the same thing applied to humans. And as you look at this, human population was pretty steady for a long, long time. And then, woof, we figured out how to control these limiting factors through better food production and storage, better medicine. Can't really comment on war because we still do that. Anyway, you saw our population explode. Well, this is the biggest question that we have to understand today. How does Charles Darwin explain the theory of natural selection, and how does he use that to support the idea of evolution? These are the 5 most important statements you're going to get out of today's lecture and this unit. First of all, there's variation within a population. If I took all of you, all the sophomores in our school, and I wrote down their shoe size, I would get a graph that looks like a bell curve. Some people like me have tiny little feet. And some people have like size 14, 15, really big feet. But most of us are somewhere in the middle. All right, so there's variation within a population. In nature, some of those variations are favorable. Being faster, having better eyesight, having better hearing, having a better sense of smell, being able to digest a certain kind of food. Then from Malthus, he took the idea that more young are produced than can survive. And so there's a competition to be one of the survivors in your species. Oh, I forgot this. This idea on the top about variation really is something he got from the governor of the Galapagos Islands. The 4th step here is that those that survive and reproduce do so because they have the favorable variations that we listed in number 2. And then they're going to pass those traits, those favorable traits, on to their offspring. So that over long, long periods of time or multiple generations, these small changes in a species accumulate and the population changes. We're going to come back to that idea a bit more when we look at some learning opportunities that will come after this. So let's go on. Was Darwin eager to publish his work? Not really. He formulated the idea in 1838. Side note, in 1839, he married his first cousin, Emma Wedgwood. They had 10 children. I hear you saying, "Ew," at home. That was pretty common in that era for people of, I guess, wealth, maybe, to marry within their family. Among Darwin's notes was a good old kind of T-chart when he was weighing his options about marriage. Reasons to get married. I will have a friend in old age. I could just see this. Get down on one knee, looks into her eyes and said, "You're better than having a dog anyhow." Reasons not to get married. Perhaps we'll quarrel and I'd have less money for books. Back to our story. He did not publish his work right away. He was very concerned about his church and how they were going to accept his idea. For instance, his idea rejected the idea that the Bible was a literal text. For his ideas to work, the earth had to be much, much, much older. If we were created in God's image, how could we be a product of chance evolution? He did not have an answer for how life started. Another quote from his notes, at the same time, it seemed foolish to reject the assertions of so many intellectually able men and girls, I know he meant us too, who fully believe in God. So basically, he feared how his idea would be received, sorry about that, and how his many friends who were active members of a church community, what they would think of his idea. So he told his wife, "Here's all my papers, here's my idea, publish this if I die." And he went on with his life. Eventually, in 1858, Alfred Russel Wallace sent him a letter and said, "Hey, I have kind of this idea about how evolution might work, and I hear you've been studying this too." So they decided to present together. Darwin got to go first, and because he had all those samples and bones and things from his trip and better documentation, he kind of gets full credit for the idea. Often in science, the person who gets there first gets all the credit, and the other person gets lost in history. In 1859, he wrote a book about his theory, and it sold out in the first day. I've looked many places to try to find out, well, did he print 10 books or 10, thousand? Because that would have an impact on the, strength of that statement. Unable to find that. All right. Darwin angered the Church of England with his work on evolution, and he got kicked out of his church. That had happened to many scientists before him. In this case, no. In fact, he's buried at Westminster Abbey, which is in London. That's the church where the kings and queens of England get crowned and where all the royals get married. It looks like this. This is the inside of a chapel that you enter from this lower part down here. You can actually go and find where Darwin is buried. So when I visited there, I asked the usher, I'd like to see where Charles Darwin is buried. He said, right over there, you can go step on him. I'm like, oh, I'm a science teacher. I could never step on his grave. Anyway, this area is filled with a whole bunch of famous scientists, including Isaac Newton. Wallace and Darwin apparently continued to be friends because Wallace was one of the pallbearers at Darwin's funeral. All right, Darwin knew Gregor Mendel. Not personally. Mendel had sent a package of notes and things to Darwin explaining what he knew about genetics and how it might help Darwin defend his theory. Unfortunately, Darwin never opened the envelope in his lifetime. Darwin's book on the origin of species explains how life began. Another misconception. No. His book is about how life changes once it was here, but he really didn't have an explanation for where life began. And that's kind of a totally different topic. Anyway, did Charles Darwin have children who helped him with this work? Well, he had sons that were involved in science and obviously engineering, but he had his theory way before his children were even born. 3 of his children died during childhood, and many of his children had poor health. So he theorized that the fact that he and his wife were so closely related may have had a negative impact on his children's health. And we'd probably have to agree that he was right about that. The safest conclusion seems to be that the whole subject is beyond the scope of man's intellect. This is Charles Darwin's thought as he tried to figure out how what he thought about evolution fit with what he thought about other parts of his life. So, if you and I have trouble trying to fit all that together, and the man who had the theory had the same problem, I think we're in good company. Count up the number that you got right. If you got 10 or more right, you are among the fittest, and you should reproduce because you have the favorable variations. Thanks for listening.